So today we're going to talk about the hierarchy of behavioral influence. This is something that I've developed over the years to help me successfully troubleshoot dogs' behavioral issues, the stuff, basically the individual in front of me. So it's something I feel no matter where you are in dog training, whether a trainer, an owner, something like that, where you can chip away and figure out really what your dog needs at an individual level. You have to understand all the influences going into there. This is not really a crash course today, but this is just going to give you the highlights of the categories so you can see kind of what we do and how we troubleshoot and how we create protocols and create management plans, stuff like that. We will break down each of these categories in a lot more detail because there's a lot of stuff going into this. So really it's the hierarchy of behavioral influence. So what does this mean? This means there's a bunch of stuff contributing to behaviors, right? So we have nature, we have nurture, we have the blending of the two. So there's a lot of influences. This is where, when we get into behavioral issues with dogs, or humans for that matter, into the psychology, there's all kinds of influences going on here. It's not like a car, you're just like changing out a part, something like that. It's a living, breathing thing that is going to be influenced by a lot of stuff in real time, and in some cases constantly changing. So how I've created to kind of give us some structure to then start refining for the individual is understand the broad category that's being influenced, and then how we do it is we start honing down to get down to that individual level. But everything above does influence what's going on. So we will always look at it as you don't get a pass for the dog standing in front of you. So like if it's a Chihuahua, if a Chihuahua is acting like a aggressive pit bull, Chihuahua doesn't get a pass because they're a Chihuahua. Now, there's going to be some things within breeds. So we talk about this a lot. This is that genetic nature side. Breeds are important to understand. Genetics are important to understand if you're digging into the trenches there with the behavioral stuff. So this is kind of, once again, the breakdown and how and why I talk about this stuff. So the first thing we have to look at as the biggest, broadest category is dog, right? So no matter what the breed is, dogs are dogs. So there's a certain dog culture that kind of is all-encompassing all dogs. Think of it like, in some ways, broadly, within the human species across the world, there's some unspoken rules of humanity, and that humanity applies to all cultures, all areas to some degree. So that's what we're talking about here. So there's certain genetic rules that apply to all dogs on Earth. That's kind of the broadest category. And we obviously break that down for our clients so they understand the filter systems that dogs are working under compared to human culture. Because when we're dealing with behavioral issues, one of the biggest things I have to go in and build is a blending of dog culture and human culture. They don't always align. So when most of the time when push comes to shove, we expect the dog to default to our culture, and dogs aren't always thinking in those terms. They have Mother Nature rules kind of in play. So one way to look at it is the stronger those genetics are, the more influence it takes to offset those genetics. Now, I'm not saying we try to suppress genetics. I'm not saying we're trying to change genetics. But being aware of those genetics goes a long way to being correct with your dog, being fair to your dog, being humane to your dog, and in a lot of cases, being successful, because in a lot of cases when we're dealing with even aggression, it's not wrong by the rules the dog is playing by. It's unwanted, but it's not necessarily wrong through the eyes they're looking through, what I call the filter system. So this is how we troubleshoot that filter system and then start blending our two cultures together to create what the individual client needs for their dog and culturally and everything else. So dogs. So we have dog culture, broad category stuff. So like I said, dog culture, right to initiate. We talk about this a lot, so that encompasses all dogs. So we take a look at that from day one when a client comes in. From there, though, the next category down, I personally start looking at is breed. So you hear this a lot with genetics. We have our breeds. Now, you got two extreme camps here. One is, well, all dogs are created equal. There's no difference in it. That could be the old stereotype of bully breeds pit bulls, right? When I started back in the day, I literally cut my teeth on super aggressive pit bulls to know their trainer would train. So there was a lot of stereotyping back then. There still is, but it's come a long way, and it's one of those things where, well, every single pit bull is dangerous and super aggressive. It's in the genetics, which is correct to some degree, which we break down these genetics, and it's not stereotypes, but there is a broader category one has to be aware of. Or the other camp was, well, it's all in how you raise them, so if you love them, everything's good. That's not true either. So we can't love away genetics. So we have broad categories of where we think the genetics should be. So what I tell everybody with modern technology, everybody does their DNA on their dog now, right? So I get that a lot when people come to me. Should we do the DNA test on our dog? And I say, for the most part, if you want to. Why? Because, and this will make more sense as we go down through the other categories, is I'm looking at the dog in front of me, not necessarily the genetic breed. Now, I need to know the breed and take breed into account if I know what it is. Why? Because there's certain baselines within breeds. This is where stereotypes come into play in a bad way, right? So if somebody called me up and said, hey, I have a dog, we've had it since a puppy, it is 6 years old now, it's very sweet with the family, the issue is, we have an apartment downstairs, the tenant's been there for the 10 years, the dog loves the tenant, but if the tenant brings somebody over who the dog doesn't know and the dog's outside, the dog tries to kill the person. And I go, okay, so we have a dog that protects in a broad category, which we talk about those things too. So we have a dog that is going to be aggressive to strangers. So I go, all right, what is the breed? If somebody said Rottweiler, within the scope of Rottweiler as a broad category, we would go, all right, we have a Rottweiler that's basically there's no leader around, so the Rottweiler is taking the lead on their property. They see somebody they don't know, they're going to be aggressive percentage-wise to that stranger. Now, I'm not saying there are sweetest Rotties in the world, but on paper, Rottweiler is going to have a higher propensity to be aggressive in those situations because that's what they were bred for. So if we had a Rottweiler, I go, all right, par for the course. We're playing with a set of genetics that isn't outside the scope of genetics on paper. A Rottweiler, to some degree, should be expected to act like that. Now, same scenario, they call me up, and instead of saying they had a Rottweiler, they go, we have a Golden Retriever. Right there, I go, all right, we still have the same issue of aggression where it's unwanted by the human, but I'm going to go on paper at least go, wow, that's not normal for a Golden Retriever. A Golden Retriever shouldn't be aggressive in that setting. Now, that doesn't mean Golden Retrievers can't be. I work way more labs and retrievers than people would think that are aggressive, but not as much as Rottweilers and Shepherds. Why? Because those breeds have basically the aggression built into them at a genetic level to a higher degree than Golden Retrievers and Labs. So knowing those breeds, same scenario, in one case with the Golden Retriever, I go, well, that's outside of the normal scope of the genetics. Whereas with the Rottweiler, we're probably dealing with normal genetics within the breed. So if somebody wants their DNA, all it does is allow us to then start going, this behavior we have or the propensity we're seeing, well, that kind of makes more sense because it's within the scope of that breed as opposed to, wow, that's so far out of the scope. That might be super dangerous because of genetics that aren't supposed to be there. So that's where breed comes in. But then you get it on the other side. Everybody goes, well, I got a Golden Retriever because they're good with family and aren't aggressive. Now, there's going to be exceptions to every demographic. So you're going to have dogs that might be aggressive, so you can't blanket statement that all Golden Retrievers are friendly and won't have aggression in them. But so a lot of people look at breed. My opinion when I'm troubleshooting or at least setting up the protocols is breed, like I said, gives you categories on paper of normal. What's more important for me when I'm able to know it is not the breed. What's more important to me than breed is the bloodlines within that breed, which a lot of times people don't know and or don't fully understand the influence of bloodlines within a certain breed. So I use Shepherds as my example. Shepherds are a great example for this, well, both good and bad, because they're so diverse. So you have, let's say, a German Shepherd. So if you wanted a German Shepherd for service work, you would go to a breeder who for the most part, and I'm saying for the most part, this is another reason, little side note, why you don't see a lot of German Shepherds in service work with all these big organizations anymore. Even though back in the 50s, Shepherds pioneered the service industry within the United States. Why? Because they tried for generations to breed out the aggression from these Shepherds, where it's part of their DNA. There's some level of aggression built into them that then, to some degree, depending on the individual, has to be managed. Whereas lab-type dogs, as a broad category, there isn't that degree of aggression that they have to offset. So that's why you see a lot more breeds like labs and stuff like that doing service work compared to Shepherds and stuff like that. Because there's a higher chance of having to offset a set of genetics that may not even be there from the beginning with another type of dog. So, bloodlines. So we have a German Shepherd, let's just say, and you wanted a German Shepherd that was more of a service type dog. You aren't going to go to a sport trainer, most likely, for that dog. But this is where people don't understand this or even given the knowledge on this. So if I was breeding dogs for service work, within the scope of the genetics of a German Shepherd, I would be breeding Shepherds that had the least amount of aggression at a genetic level from day one. Yet if I was supplying the military for high-end special ops teams, I'd be breeding for the highest level of aggression I could get, quick triggered and everything else. So a Shepherd is not a Shepherd. A Shepherd is depending on the bloodlines. So you could have Shepherds like Czech Shepherds. They're going to have a higher level of aggression than, on paper, showline Shepherds. And then you can get into the different areas of that. But your bloodlines are way more important, in my opinion, than the breed. So how would you ask that, as a person before you even get a dog? A lot of times when I ask, well, what did you look for in a breeder or that particular dog? They go, well, they breed the best German Shepherds in the country. Okay, but what is the definition of good or the best? You need to know what they prioritize in their bloodline to know what's going to be normal. Once again, I get a lot of people going to working line dogs and they kind of want a family dog. It's like wanting a high mile per gallon car to go get groceries. So you want high gas mileage, you want comfort, yet you go out and buy a Bugatti. So now you aren't going to get good gas mileage, you're going to get a lot of maintenance, you're going to get a car that goes really fast and probably doesn't do well getting groceries. It can be done, but it comes with a lot of extra stuff because it wasn't designed for that. So in the car world, it's a little more black and white. If you need a pickup truck, you buy a pickup truck. But you don't necessarily buy a Ferrari and then say your Ferrari doesn't work well because it can't tow your trailer. It wasn't designed to tow the trailer. So think of bloodlines and breeds like that. It's further refinement. Then the last influence I look at is the individual, can't spell, at the end of the day. So yes, I need to understand dog culture and probably broad filter systems that individual's looking at. I then use the information, if I know the breed, to kind of give me a better box of what should be normal and abnormal on paper. Then, of course, if I know the bloodlines, that further refines it on, okay, for 10 generations, these bloodlines are known for killing their handlers. It's not going to be out of the blue when the dog starts pushing back on the owners. Because for 10 generations, that bloodline was known for killing handlers. And yes, that's a real example. I've worked with particular breeds that they were sourced for that reason, known for killing their own handlers. The average person, if you don't understand what's going on, you're going to get in trouble very quickly. And then the individual in front of us. You're going to have individual variation. You're going to have unicorns. You're going to have outliers. So really, this is the most important factor, especially when you're dealing with behavioral issues, is what does the individual need in front of you? But you also have to be aware of these upper tiers still influencing in broader categories. So this is basically what I'm doing every time a client walks into our facility. I'm breaking this down and knowing all these things are impacting that dog's decisions on a daily basis. So what we do is go in, take all this, and create a culture that's acceptable for the owner and the dog. And a lot of times, because I'm dealing with really strong genetics, I'm not here to suppress the genetics. I'm not here to convince the dog Mother Nature is wrong. What we're doing is trying to blend the culture So that way we have what the individual is capable of without trying to suppress it, but still keeping that team safe and everything else at the end of the day. So in other videos, we're going to break this down. What is within dog culture? You know, what are certain propensity of breeds, which I think is, if you go on like AKC, for instance, you could type in any kind of breed and they're going to kind of give you like these bullet points of, oh, you need a strong leader, or oh, these dogs are leery of strangers. They're really broad categories, which there's nothing wrong with that. But when you start dealing with individual dogs, in our case, not humans, but individual dogs, you need to take this stuff and further refine it. So we'll go in, and I do this with clients, we go in and take the breed. This particular category has been very helpful for a lot of my potential clients. We get a lot of phone calls for clients who are thinking about getting a dog, and they start talking to us even before they get their dog. So then we sometimes even help with the choosing of that dog, but a lot of times we might just, tell them, okay, if you're thinking about a Hungarian Kuvas as an example, we can go, all right, are you okay monitoring that dog 24/7? Are you okay with that dog if it's left by itself and your drunk brother comes over the wall, you're okay with that dog potentially killing your brother? So these are things that I don't think is talked about enough within breeds. And once again, there's always going to be an exception to the rule. This is where I feel people get in trouble. Rottweilers for a while, right? They had their heyday back in the 90s, kind of went back under the surface. You started to see more come up. A lot of times when I started dealing with Rottweilers, it was clients who have owned 3 or 4 or 5 Rottweilers. It's because in that time frame, as breeds get more popular, we tend to what I call water them down or dumb them down. So it's kind of like a race car that everybody goes, wow, look at how fast that car is. So that's what they're selling. They're selling that race car, but realistically, most people are getting a watered down V6 version of that race car. It happens within dogs also. The average person couldn't handle a true working Rottweiler, as an example. They didn't want to sell to a niche market, so basically they created dogs that looked like Rottweilers that didn't necessarily act like Rottweilers. And this is true for all breeds, and once again, individual variation here, different intensities. But that's where if somebody's had 4 watered down versions of a working breed and suddenly get the real thing, they don't know what to do with it because their baseline was off. So that's where if somebody understands the breed beforehand, they can kind of make a judgment call on, does that dog fit what they need to do? So we go down in and we're going to break down some breeds and stuff like that, the popular breeds and or actually non-popular breeds. I've had the good fortune in my career to deal with a lot of rare breed dogs. That's why a lot of people come to me from other states and stuff like that, because I have worked with a bunch of rare breeds. It's understanding the strong genetics and how to deal with them. You can't treat every dog like a golden retriever. And then when we have it, especially when we get into these tough breeds, we do know where the bloodlines are coming from. And that's where we really sit down and look. Okay, you have this puppy. Well, mom was the sweetest dog in the world, and the breeder told us don't go near the fence with the dad because the dad will kill you. That gives you insight to where probably the genetics are going to fall within your dog. So those bloodlines are very important. And then, we can further ask, okay, is this a normal thing? Have they bred that dog for generations, or what they call coveted? Did they covet that type of behavior? Were they trying to minimize that type of behavior? So that stuff is really important beforehand. But unfortunately, I educate people after the fact because they weren't fully aware of what they were getting into, both breed, bloodline, and then once again, you can have the individual thrown off. You can have that unicorn thrown in there. You hear it all the time. Like, oh, well, I own 10 dogs. I never even had to teach them anything. They would automatically come to me. They would walk around with me off leash and have zero training. Old Yeller. So Old Yeller is a unicorn within the kind of category of dogs. So you're going to have outliers there, both good and bad. It just so happens we tend to specialize in the type of dogs that fall outside of that scope of basically normal textbook genetics. So think of it, the example I use, so here's a spectrum, and we have a spectrum of, let's say, normal, which is all very subjective, right? Normal is normal within the scope you're dealing with. That's why this stuff is important. So let's just say we have normal. If I was going to run percentages, I kind of use the number of 80%. So normal kind of falls in 80%. So the analogy I give is think about like public education in some ways. So public education is designed to accommodate X percentage of kids in an X amount of time with X amount of resources. So like I said, these aren't real numbers. These are just comparison numbers. So let's just say that system accommodates 80% of the kids. That could be treat training. That could be, certain organizations. So you have 80% of dogs that will fall underneath a particular set of training or protocols or something like that. Nothing wrong with that. So, but because you can accommodate 80% of the population, the issue arises is when your individual dog falls outside of that 80%. So the further outside of that generic normal 80%, probably whether on, let's say this is the positive, confident end of the spectrum, and let's say this is the insecure, fearful end of the spectrum. Neither, depending on which side you're on, from how we're going to troubleshoot it, it doesn't really matter. In the details, it'll matter whether we have a confident dog or an insecure dog. But it's a simple fact that the normal stuff that's mainstream that you guys see on social media or just categorically with a lot of trainers falls in this 80%. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if you have an individual who is not genetically within that 80%, you're not going to get success with them, whether that's behavioral stuff, whether that's even obedience and stuff like that. You need to accommodate the outliers. And over the years, that's kind of the niche I happen to fall in. We specialize in the extra 20% that don't fall within the normal scope of genetics. That's this, which, once again, here is 80%, let's just say, right? So here's our 80%, and then you could even start, actually, let's make it a little easier. Let's say that's 60%, right? Dog. And then breed will take in, let's say, another 10 and 10 here, so that's 20%, right? And then bloodlines will take in a little bit more, and then you have those little bit of outliers there to make up, quote, your 100%. So we start here, but then you have to keep refining it so that way you're looking at the individual in front of you. I've just built this over time to really be successful at looking at the individual in front of me and being able to create protocols for our clients at a very good rate of success. Now, in other videos, we will talk about definition of success. I don't force a terminology on somebody. We figure out what they need, and then we build that definition for them. So we have these outliers, and that's where I know in the dog world it's not really normal a lot of times, but our clientele, we get a lot of referral. So for the last, over 10 years, we've been almost 99% referral based. It comes from just our clients, a large portion of our clients. Over the last few years, let's say in the last 5 years, we're getting a lot more trainer referral, so in organization referral. So the trainer referral is for one of two reasons. Either certain individuals won't touch those outliers with a 10-foot pole because of usually the severity of the aggression in those dogs. So that's where we get the phone call, hey, this isn't our cup of tea, go see Fearless Canine. The other ones we get when it's not necessarily it's performance-based, not behavioral-based, is we'll get trainers who, they run very well. They're excellent at running in that 60%. But if they start getting a dog that starts needing more than that 60%, they don't know where to go with it. They refer the dogs to me, then I bring that to a higher level of performance and stuff like that. And that's where we tie in with command structure, looking at the performance, still making sure the relationship is right. So it's all kinds of stuff going in. So the further you add to that collective outside of that 60%, what happens is you have to really understand what's going on to really get the tweaks out of it. So hopefully that's a quick little intro into kind of what's running in our heads while we're looking at dogs and creating plans for our clients. Once again, the hierarchy of behavioral influence, I feel whether you're a starting off trainer, whether you're a pet owner, whether you're, doesn't matter, a clicker trainer, you're a treat trainer, you're whatever, you're a toy trainer, doesn't matter. But what does matter is within the scope of genetics and the individual in front of you, how much do you have to be understanding that individual? So we'll break this all down in other videos for you. So if this was something you're interested in to find out more, you're going to keep looking, and we'll have these all broken down in other videos so you can really pick this stuff apart. Thank you.